Mandy Harper. At 29 years old, Mandy is no stranger to life's hardships. After her mother, Mrs. Linda, was diagnosed with a chronic illness, Mandy put aside all her personal plans to work at Timbers Cafe, both to earn a living and to care for her mother. Although it wasn't her dream job, she loved the familiarity of the cafe, the warm atmosphere filled with the aroma of freshly roasted coffee and the friendly smiles from regular customers. Timbers Cafe has a unique, simple, and cozy style. The walls are decorated with images of mountain landscapes, vintage decorations like wooden clocks and porcelain teacups, and the soft yellow light from hanging lamps creates a warm ambiance. Every evening, Mandy often sits behind the counter, preparing drinks while listening to stories from the regulars. These stories always seem to revolve around the same topics: the weather, politics, and old times. That evening, the cafe was quite quiet. Mandy was wiping down the counter, listening to Mr. George, an elderly regular, talk about his days as an engineer. George, as usual, was discussing the excesses of modern technology and his concerns about what AI might bring to society. Mandy was familiar with his tone, but still smiled and nodded as she listened. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, pulling Mandy out of her thoughts. She looked up to greet the customer as usual, but the moment her eyes met the man who had just entered, she froze. A tall man, dressed in a slightly wrinkled suit but still exuding a distinctive demeanor, walked into the cafe with a calm appearance. His face, though weary, seemed very familiar. Mandy immediately recognized him. It was Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX and Tesla, one of the most famous people in the world. The atmosphere in the cafe changed instantly. Whispers began to spread from the regular tables. People who usually didn't pay much attention to the outside world suddenly took notice. Some looked at him with curiosity, others whispered judgments, while a few remained indifferent as if Elon's presence didn't matter. Mandy could clearly feel the surprise spreading throughout the small room. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. "He's just a customer, like everyone else," she told herself, trying not to let the nervousness overwhelm her. Taking a deep breath, Mandy stepped out from behind the counter, offering her professional smile as always. She approached his table, where he had just sat down by the window, the dim light reflecting on his thoughtful face. "Good evening. How can I help you today?" Mandy's voice was gentle but slightly shaky. Elon looked up, his sharp eyes showing a hint of surprise when they met hers, but quickly he responded in a warm tone. "Just a black coffee and an apple pie if you have one." Mandy nodded. "Right this way," she said, trying to maintain her composure. Returning to the counter, Mandy could clearly feel the curious glances from regular customers watching her. A few, like Mr. George, frowned skeptically, as if Elon's appearance needed thorough analysis. Meanwhile, Mandy was preparing the coffee while pondering, why is he here? A small cafe like Timbers isn't usually his kind of place. As she brought the coffee and apple pie to the table, Mandy paid closer attention. Elon didn't look like the images she had seen in the media, confident, sharp, sometimes even cold. Instead, he appeared tired, almost as if he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Thank you," he said briefly, his eyes once again gazing out the window. There was something in his voice, a simple sincerity that made Mandy feel he wasn't like how people usually described him. Back at the counter, Mandy couldn't help but steal a glance at him. He sat there, quietly sipping his coffee, his eyes distant, as if pondering something significant. He's just a person too, Mandy thought quietly, but deep down, she felt his presence here wasn't a coincidence. Mandy didn't know that Elon Musk's appearance was not only a surprise on her quiet evening, but also the beginning of events that would forever change her life. Mandy tried to focus on her work, but her eyes kept inadvertently lingering on the man sitting by the window. Elon Musk remained silent, occasionally taking a sip of his black coffee and cutting small pieces of apple pie, his gaze blank as he looked out the window. Although this small cafe provided a cozy feeling, he seemed to be immersed in another world, carrying deep contemplation. Mandy couldn't stop wondering why he appeared here, in an unremarkable cafe in this remote town. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the cafe began to buzz more than usual. Whispers arose from most of the tables. "That's Elon Musk, right?" a young customer in the corner asked his companion. "Yes, no mistake. But why's he here?" the other replied, his voice tinged with astonishment. Even the older regulars, who rarely cared about the latest news, started whispering among themselves. Mandy overheard phrases like, "I don't like those billionaires," or "Maybe he's planning to buy something in this town." These rumors made the usually serene atmosphere at Timber's Cafe unusually tense. In another corner, George, the oldest regular customer, sat quietly with his coffee. A former engineer, George was well known in the cafe for his straightforward personality and strong opinions. He had worked in the automotive industry for 3 decades before retiring and often said that modern technology was going too far. When his eyes settled on Elon Musk, his expression became stern. Mandy noticed George put down his coffee cup and stood up. He slowly walked over to Elon's table, making the space in the cafe feel like it had stopped. Everyone's eyes turned toward the two of them. The entire cafe fell silent, and Mandy could clearly hear George's footsteps on the wooden floor. George stood in front of Elon's table, arms crossed, speaking firmly. "You're Elon Musk, aren't you?" George asked, his voice steady enough to capture everyone's attention. Elon looked up, showing no signs of irritation or surprise. "Yes," he replied calmly, his eyes sharp yet polite. George tilted his head, scrutinizing him. "I heard you were behind OpenAI, but then you left and started xAI. I'm curious, why? Is it because you want to control everything?" George's voice clearly conveyed his skepticism. Elon set his coffee cup down, crossed his arms in front of the table, and responded calmly. "Yes, I did support OpenAI. I left because I disagreed with some of the organization's directions. I believe AI should be transparent and oriented to serve humanity, not influenced by personal interests. xAI was founded to pursue those principles." George frowned. "Transparency? That sounds nice, but I've lived long enough to know that billionaires' words often differ greatly from their actions. Power and money, aren't those your true goals?" George's words caused the entire cafe to hold its breath. A few nodded in agreement with his skepticism. Others sat quietly, observing with curiosity. Mandy, standing behind the counter, felt her throat dry. She knew George didn't mean any harm, but his words were heavy and confrontational. Elon showed no sign of anger. Instead, he looked directly at George, his voice remaining calm. "It's your right to be skeptical, but responsibility isn't always easy. I don't want to watch technology, especially AI, develop without proper oversight or direction. I'm doing this not for money or power. I'm doing it because I believe we have a responsibility for what we create." George wasn't convinced. He crossed his arms, staring directly at Elon. Easy to say. But do you really believe you can steer something like AI without harming ordinary people like us? AI isn't just a tool. It's something that can control society." Elon sighed, his eyes showing a hint of fatigue but remaining resolute. "Technology will continue to advance, whether we like it or not. The issue is who shapes it. I'm not doing this because I want power. I'm doing it because I don't want to look back and realize I did nothing." Elon's words silenced the room. Some people seemed thoughtful, while others looked at George to gauge his reaction. But George remained skeptical. Mandy looked into Elon's eyes, sensing the sincerity in his words. But she also saw the pressure and loneliness in how he faced the criticism. She knew she shouldn't intervene, but her heart wouldn't let her stay silent. She took a deep breath, placed her towel down, and stepped out from behind the counter. All eyes in the cafe immediately turned to her. Mandy knew this action might cause trouble, but she couldn't stand by and watch someone she admired being unfairly criticized. "Mr. George, I respect your opinion, but I don't think we should jump to conclusions. No one is perfect, but at least he's trying to change the world for the better," she said, her voice shaky but determined. Silence enveloped the cafe. Everyone paused, waiting for George and Elon's reactions, unaware that this would lead to an event that would forever change Mandy's life. The atmosphere in Timber's cafe seemed to freeze after Mandy's words. All eyes were on her, some surprised, others displeased. Tension filled the room. Mandy could feel the heavy silence, but inside, she felt a strong urge. She knew she couldn't stay still while seeing someone like Elon Musk, whom she admired for his relentless efforts to change the world, being unfairly criticized. "Mr. George," Mandy continued, her voice trembling but her eyes steady, "I understand your concerns. Technology is always a double-edged sword, but haven't all advancements in history faced skepticism? Criticizing is easy, but if we don't give people like him, the ones who dare to think big and act, a chance, who will do the things we don't dare to do?" George, not used to being contradicted, turned to look at Mandy with a stern gaze. "You speak as if you understand technology, AI," he said, his voice ironclad. "But do you really understand what's at stake? People like us, the ordinary folks, are the ones who will suffer when technology gets out of control." Mandy took a deep breath, feeling her heart race. "I may not fully understand everything Mr. Musk is doing," she said, her voice calmer, "but I know he doesn't just talk, he acts. From sending people to space to using his personal wealth to help children, hospitals, and scientific research. I believe if he says AI needs transparency, that's something we should support, not doubt." Mandy's words silenced the cafe. A few regulars frowned, pondering what she had just said. Others seemed indifferent, but Elon's gaze, still fixed on his table, was now more attentive. There was a spark in his eyes, a hint of surprise, even gratitude that Mandy hadn't realized. George crossed his arms and shook his head. "You sound nice, Mandy, but the truth is, people like him aren't like us. Billionaires like him only care about power and control, not the values you're talking about." Mandy was about to respond, but before she could speak, another voice echoed from a corner of the cafe. "She's right," a young customer spoke up, his voice hesitant but sincere. "If there aren't people willing to try, we'll never make progress. I think Mr. Musk deserves a chance." Some regulars turned back to look at the person who had spoken, their faces showing a mix of surprise. But before the debate could continue, a strong and decisive voice interrupted. "Mandy!" Mandy turned around, startled to see Mr. Johnson, the owner, coming out from the kitchen. He stood there, his face stern, his cold eyes sweeping over her and the surrounding customers. "Mandy, can I talk to you for a moment?" Mandy nodded, feeling her palms sweat. She followed Mr. Johnson to the counter, where he leaned over the table and spoke in a low voice, clearly annoyed. "Mandy, what are you doing?" he asked, his eyebrows furrowed. "I was just trying to protect a customer," she replied, her voice quiet but still firm. "Mr. Musk doesn't deserve to be criticized that way. I thought I was doing the right thing." Mr. Johnson sighed, glancing at the customers murmuring in the distance. "I understand your good intentions, but you have to remember that these customers are the foundation of this cafe. We can't risk upsetting them. Arguing with customers, especially someone like George, is unacceptable." "But sir, I wasn't arguing on purpose," Mandy responded. "I just thought that—" Mr. Johnson raised his hand to cut her off. "Mandy, I'm sorry, but I think it's best if you find another place to work. I'll let you work a few more days while I arrange for a replacement." Mr. Johnson's words hit Mandy hard. She stood there, stunned, unable to believe what she had just heard. You're firing me?" she asked, her voice choking. Mr. Johnson nodded, his expression showing a hint of regret but remaining firm. "You're a good employee, Mandy, but I can't let this affect the cafe. This is my final decision." Mandy stood still, feeling as if her entire world was collapsing around her. Timbers Cafe wasn't just a job, it was a place where she felt safe, a part of her life for the past 3 years. Her throat felt tight, but she tried to stay calm. At his table, Elon slowly stood up. He walked over to Mandy, his eyes showing a mix of gratitude and regret. "Thank you for standing up for me," he said, his voice deep but sincere. "I'm sorry this caused you trouble?" Mandy looked at him, her eyes welling up, but she smiled. "It's okay. I was just doing what I thought was right," she said softly, her voice light but determined. Elon nodded, as if wanting to remember every word she said. "I won't forget this," he said before leaving the cafe, leaving Mandy alone to face the disappointment and curious gazes of the remaining customers. Though heartbroken, Mandy knew she had done the right thing, but she didn't realize that this small action would lead to a significant change in her life in no time. Mandy continued her work at Timbers Cafe, even though she knew she only had a few days left. Every morning, as she walked through the familiar door, she couldn't help but feel a heavy heart. She loved this place, not just because it was her job, but because it had become a part of her life for the past 3 years. However, the atmosphere in the cafe had changed since the previous evening's event. The regular customers now looked at her with a mix of curiosity and slight hesitation. Mandy felt like she was walking on thin ice, where any wrong step could shatter everything. That afternoon, Mandy was behind the counter making coffee when the familiar doorbell rang. She looked up, thinking it was another regular customer coming for lunch. But the moment she saw who had just walked in, she froze. It was Elon Musk. He entered with a more composed and confident demeanor than the first time, wearing a neater suit, his eyes brighter but still sharp. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the cafe. The murmuring conversations from the tables suddenly stopped, and all eyes turned to him. Some regulars whispered, exchanging puzzled looks, clearly not understanding why Elon Musk had returned to a place like Timbers Cafe. Mandy, still holding the coffee cup, felt as if the world had slowed down. Elon didn't stop to look around. He walked straight to the table by the window, the very table he had sat at the night before, and sat down with a calm demeanor. Mandy felt her heart race. She tried to steady herself, but her mind was full of questions. Why did he come back? Does it have something to do with me? As the customers continued their quiet conversations, Mandy knew she couldn't hide. She took the freshly made coffee, added an apple pie to the tray, and approached Elon's table. As she got closer, she tried to maintain her professional smile despite her inner turmoil. "Thank you for coming back," she said, her voice small but clear, placing the coffee and pie on his table. Elon looked up at her. His face was still stern, but there was a warm spark in his eyes that Mandy hadn't expected. "You're still here," he said, his voice deep and soft. "I'm glad about that." His words caught Mandy off guard. She didn't know how to respond, only offering a forced smile before turning back to the counter. But she couldn't help but feel Elon's eyes following her. Elon didn't leave the cafe immediately. He sat there, drinking his coffee, occasionally looking out the window, but mostly watching Mandy as she worked. Other customers kept talking. Some were surprised, while others, like George, just sat silently with unreadable expressions. After a long while, Elon stood up slowly and walked toward the counter. Mandy, organizing the cups, looked up and was stunned to see him standing right in front of her. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath, all eyes fixed on them. "Do you have a moment?" Elon asked, his voice gentle but firm. Mandy glanced at Mr. Johnson, who was standing nearby. His face showed a hint of awkwardness, but he nodded slightly, as if giving her permission to continue. "Yes," Mandy replied, placing the towel down. Elon smiled, motioning toward the door. "Can we talk outside?" Outside the cafe, a gentle breeze blew, easing the tension in Mandy's heart. Elon turned back to look at her, his face more serious than when he was inside the cafe. "I want to thank you," he began, his voice full of sincerity. "Last night, you did something that not many people would dare to do. You stood up for me, even though it caused you trouble." Mandy shook her head, trying to hide her embarrassment. "I was just saying what I believed was right," she said. "I didn't think things would escalate like that." "That's why I'm here today," Elon continued. "Did you know that your actions not only moved me but also made me realize that we need people like you on our team?" Mandy blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Elon gave a slight smile. "I have a charitable organization. We support community projects, hospitals, and those in need. We're looking for people like you, individuals with courage and integrity. I'd like to invite you to work with us." Mandy felt her heart skip a beat. You're inviting me to work with you?" she asked, her voice almost lost. "Exactly," Elon replied. "The job isn't glamorous, but I believe you'd be a great fit. It requires dedication and a compassionate heart, qualities you've clearly demonstrated." Mandy stood still, feeling both surprised and bewildered. She never imagined that standing up to protect a stranger in a small cafe could lead her to a place where she truly belonged, a place where she felt meaningful and valued. When Elon left the cafe, Mandy remained behind the counter, watching the door close. An indescribable feeling washed over her, not quite relief, not quite anxiety. It was a mix of hope, gratitude, and a bit of fear for the future. She knew she had stepped into a new chapter of her life, but she couldn't stop the questions swirling in her mind. Was she truly capable? Could she live up to Elon Musk's expectations, the man who had placed his trust in her? In the final days of her work at Timber's Cafe, Mandy tried to stay calm, completing her tasks as usual. Although she was mentally prepared, the change in the regulars' attitudes took her by surprise. Some, especially the younger ones, looked at her with admiration, as if her actions that day had changed their perspective. Some customers even approached and whispered, "You're really brave. I wish I could stand up like you." But not everyone supported her. Mr. George, though quieter since that day, still wore a stern expression whenever he saw her. Mandy didn't blame him. She understood that sometimes changing someone's perspective takes time. A few weeks later, Mandy officially started her new job at Elon Musk's charitable organization. Her first day began in a small but cozy office in the city center. The walls were decorated with images from the community projects the organization had undertaken. Children smiling brightly in classrooms, happy patients in hospitals equipped with modern medical devices, and villagers smiling beside clean water wells. Mandy was welcomed by a small group of colleagues, people as passionate and dedicated as she was. Her work began simply: handling phone calls, organizing documents, and assisting in organizing fundraising events. However, Mandy realized that every small action had significant meaning. When she saw reports about families being supported, patients saved by medical equipment, she felt her heart warm with pride. One of the first projects Mandy participated in was helping a local hospital that lacked medical equipment. She spent hours making calls, contacting donors, and planning a large fundraising event. Although the work was hard, seeing the joyful faces of young patients receiving support made all her efforts worthwhile. She realized that this wasn't just a job, it was a mission. Elon stayed in touch with Mandy. Despite being busy with numerous large projects, he occasionally sent emails or visited the office. Once, he came by and held a small meeting with all the staff. Standing before everyone, he said, "Mandy isn't just an employee. She's a symbol of the values our organization strives for: courage, integrity, and belief in a better future. That's what I hope all of us to uphold." Elon's words made Mandy feel both proud and humbled. More than that, it motivated her to work even harder. One day, while Mandy was working late at the office, she received a call from a hospital in her small town. The hospital manager informed her that they had just received a new batch of medical equipment, the result of the project Mandy had helped support. His voice was full of gratitude. "Thank you, Mandy. Without you, we wouldn't have been able to do this." After hanging up, Mandy felt a wave of emotions wash over her. She remembered her first day stepping into Timber's cafe, a young girl with dreamy eyes, dragged down by the realities of life. And now, she was truly changing the world, even if only in a small corner. Meanwhile, life at Timber's cafe continued. One day, Mandy decided to visit the old cafe. She walked through the familiar door, feeling as if everything was unchanged. The smell of roasted coffee, the soft chime of the doorbell, and the warm light from the hanging lamps. Mr. Johnson, the owner, smiled when he saw her. "Mandy, long time no see. How are things?" Mandy nodded, a light smile spreading on her face. "Everything's great, sir. I just wanted to come back and see how everyone's doing." As she was talking, Mr. George, the man who had confronted Elon, walked up to her. His face was still stern, but his eyes seemed gentler. "Mandy," he began, his voice deep but sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened that day. I don't agree with everything, but I respect you for standing up for what you believe in. Maybe sometimes we need people like you to change our perspectives." Mandy was surprised but grateful. "Thank you, George. That means a lot to me." A year later, Mandy's life had completely changed. She was promoted, leading a small team responsible for community projects across the country. The job demanded a lot of time and effort, but Mandy felt every moment was worth it. Her mother, Mrs. Linda, had partially recovered thanks to the medical support from the organization's programs. Mandy knew this was why she loved her job. It not only helped others but also directly impacted those she loved. One day, as she was returning home, Mandy received a letter from Elon Musk. The neat and concise handwriting carried a profound message. "Mandy, thank you for standing up that day. Sometimes a small action can change so much. I'm proud of you. The world needs more people like you." Mandy read and reread the letter, feeling warmth spread through her heart. She never imagined that standing up to protect a stranger in a small cafe could lead her to where she belonged, a place where she felt meaningful and valued. Mandy Harper proved that sometimes small actions driven by courage and belief in what's right can change not only one's own life, but also those around them. In a world where skepticism and criticism easily overshadow, standing up to protect something good becomes rare but extremely important. Mandy's story is a reminder that with a sincere heart and the willingness to act, anyone can make a difference. Her action in the cafe not only helped her find a new career path, but also inspired others, including ourselves. Through this story, we learn that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the act of moving forward despite it. And compassion is the strength that can connect people, no matter where they come from or what they do. Let Mandy's story remind us that every kind act, no matter how small, has the potential to create significant change. We don't need to be billionaires like Elon Musk or possess extraordinary power. We just need to dare to believe in what's right and act with a passionate heart. If this story moved or inspired you, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next inspirational stories. Thank you for watching, and always remember that you have the power to make a difference, no matter how small or large. See you in the next stories.